Welcome to Reverse Diabetes Naturally. I'm Dr. David DeRose, President of Compass Health Consulting, and your host for this exciting journey into simple things you can do to make a difference with diabetes. You might even be wondering, why speak about diabetes? How important is it? Well, no doubt if you've tuned in to this episode, you're thinking about this condition. Diabetes is indeed one of the leading metabolic conditions in the world. If you look at the statistics, diabetes is one of America's great epidemics. And it's largely due to rising numbers of individuals with what we call type 2 diabetes. Let's just stop right here and give a few definitions. I can remember in the old days when I was in medical school, there was no such thing as type 1 and type 2 diabetes. We spoke about children developing juvenile diabetes and adults having what? Adult onset diabetes. But those definitions, those terms became actually confusing when we started finding young people developing what looked very much like the same type of diabetes we saw in adulthood. Thus, the name type 2 diabetes was assigned to the type of diabetes that occurs as a result of what we call insulin resistance. It's insulin not working the way it should in the body. We'll speak more about that in this presentation. On the other hand, the juvenile diabetes was given the designation type 1 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is an autoimmune process typically. In other words, the body is attacking itself. In this case, it's attacking the islet cells or the beta cells, the producing cells in the pancreas that make insulin. Type 1 diabetes can actually occur in adulthood, although it's not as common. What we're seeing today is an epidemic in the Western world, like in the United States, that's being driven by diabetes of the type 2 variety. If you actually look at just how broad the scope of that epidemic is, it really is staggering. Some 25 million Americans have the condition. That amounts to 8% of the population. This actually represents a 26% increase from 2005. 7 million of those 25 million individuals are undiagnosed. You say, wait. How would we know how many people are not diagnosed with diabetes? Well, it's simply based on population data. For example, experts will do a screening event in some region, and they'll find that there are X number of people who have diabetes who didn't know it. And what that amounts to is about 27 to 30% of those who have diabetes are unaware that they have the condition. If you were to look at it in other ways, roughly 11% of Americans over 20 have diabetes. And by the time we get to the age of 65 and older, over 1/4 of the U.S. population have diabetes. As far as the impact of diabetes, there are different ways to calculate death statistics in the United States, but one way assigns diabetes as the 7th leading cause of death. At any given age, people with diabetes are about twice as likely to die as people who don't have the condition. There are human costs to diabetes that far transcend the numbers. Think about it this way: even if someone does not die from diabetes, they're likely to have serious complications that affect their ability to live and to have high quality existence from day to day. The most common diabetic complication is diabetic nerve damage, technically known as diabetic neuropathy. 60 to 70% of people with diabetes have mild to severe forms of nerve damage. Why this is so important is because it can influence sensation in the hands and feet. You might say, well, what difference does it make if I can't feel that well? Well, it can make a huge difference. One of the big problems with loss of foot sensation is increased risk for foot damage. And I'm thinking of things that may sound fairly innocuous if you're not a health professional, like a little sore on your foot. The problem is, a little sore that you're unaware of can become a big sore. And because in diabetes healing is often impaired, it's a little sore something that may seem insignificant that often sets the stage for foot and leg amputations. Other things that can be caused by diabetic neuropathy include digestive problems. After all, your digestive system is controlled by nervous input, nervous system input from the brain and also from what we call the autonomic or automatic nervous system. When that's not functioning properly, you can have digestive problems. Some of these nerve-related problems may not seem all that significant if you're not dealing with them, but I've had patients who couldn't work because of burning pain in their legs. I've had patients who could not sleep because of severe diabetic neuropathy symptoms. It's not just loss of sensation you see, it's abnormal sensation as well. But come back to that impaired sensation equation and the connection with amputations. Are you aware that some 60 to 80,000 amputations occur each year in the United States because of diabetes alone? That's right, about 60% of all non-traumatic lower limb amputations are caused by diabetes. Well, nerve problems can affect quality of life, but so can vision. If you look at the leading cause of blindness among adults 20 to 74 years of age, you are looking diabetes square in the face. Some 12 to 24,000 new cases of blindness each year in America from diabetes. Diabetes, you see, causes damage to small blood vessels. If those small blood vessels are in the back of the eye, you will get something called diabetic retinopathy. Some 4.2 million Americans with diabetes over the age of 40 have significant diabetic neuropathy. 750,000, in that range, 2/3 to 750,000 people actually have retinopathy so bad that they are at significant risk of severe vision loss. Now, the good news, before we go much further, is simply this. Diabetic complications can be reversed. I have seen people with diabetic neuropathy have their neuropathic symptoms dramatically improve. I've seen people with diabetic retinopathy, eye problems, dramatically improve. Even diabetic nephropathy, kidney problems. Early on, there is some evidence that you could slow the progression, maybe even reverse it some. How do you do it? That's what we're talking about in this presentation. We're talking about reversing diabetes naturally. I'll just be honest with you. The foundation for reversing diabetes naturally is lifestyle. Lifestyle practices are powerful in reversing this disease state. If you've tuned in to any of our other presentations in the LifeStart series, you realize that there is a powerful mnemonic, a memory device, which is actually technically called an acronym that helps us remember 9 natural therapies, 9 natural strategies that can help us reverse a host of disease processes. Diabetes is included on that list. Before we go any further, speaking about diabetes, its reversibility and strategies, I want to just take time to help you see the big picture, and that is LifeStart. Let me just quickly walk you through the LifeStart elements. The L stands for liquids. Our choice of beverages has a role in diabetes, whether we develop it, if we have it, how well it's controlled. Liquids are important in diabetes. The I in LifeStart stands for interpersonal relationships. Being connected with other people is a powerful health-giving factor. It can help you with your diabetes. If you have social support, if you're socially connected with people, you will actually tend to do better with this condition. The F stands for foods. We're going to take a look at what dietary choices are the most important as far as reversing diabetes naturally. And then we have the E. E stands for exercise. Exercise is of vital importance as we're dealing with the diabetic state. Start, LifeStart, L-I-F-E, S is for sunshine. Let me tell you something interesting about sunshine, because we're not going to speak all that much about it in this presentation. Vitamin D is important actually in helping the immune system function optimally. One of the places in the world that is really challenged when it comes to sunshine is Scandinavia. Some years ago, they started giving children supplements of vitamin D, infants. And what they found is they were able to dramatically decrease the rate of type 1 diabetes. So, if you are making this connection, autoimmunity, type 1 diabetes, vitamin D has a role in it, and the sunlight is probably the single best way to make vitamin D. Problem is, if you live in Scandinavia or if you're stationed in Antarctica, you're not going to get much sunshine during the winter months. You need to take a vitamin D supplement. Let's move on with the LifeStart acronym. T stands for temperance. Temperance is the concept of doing good things in moderation, but totally avoiding those things that are harmful. We'll speak about that to some extent in this presentation. A is for air, fresh air. If you've heard me speak about this subject in other settings, you'll know the biggest pollutant as far as human health consequences is nothing that any factory does. It is cigarette smoke. If you're a smoker, you're exposing your body to chemicals that are actually impairing your entire metabolic picture, and diabetes is among the risk factors, that's right, of individuals that smoke. You're increasing your risk of that condition. Let's go on now. We've just got a few more elements in the acronym, then we'll come back and we'll give you a bigger picture. We've talked about life. We've talked about STAR for rest. Are you aware that if you're cutting yourself short on sleep, that you will ramp up your stress hormone levels? And as stress hormone levels go up, guess what? So do blood sugars. Higher stress actually puts you in a state that predisposes you to diabetes. I'll just be honest with you. I have seen patients with diabetes and their main risk factor was undiagnosed. It was sleep apnea. That's right. If you have a problem with snoring, and you actually stop breathing at night, you may be oblivious to it, but have someone observe you. If you stop breathing at night, this is a hallmark of sleep apnea. That's actually what sleep apnea is. It means you stop breathing or you have no breathing. A means without, pnea refers to breathing. And so when you stop breathing multiple times throughout the night, which is the characteristic of that sleep apneic state, your brain is arousing multiple times through the night. You may not wake up, but your sleep is interrupted, the stress hormone levels are higher, and that in and of itself can set the stage for diabetes. So adequate rest is important. That's just one illustration of it. And then the last point that I like to talk about is trust in divine power. I say it's the last point I like to talk about because there's a part of my life, a time in my life where I thought that there really was no spiritual being that was willing to guide us and help us. As a physician, I realize this is so important today. I've seen my patients get significant help from realizing that there is a loving Creator who wants to aid them in the process of lifestyle change. That's not what you believe? Listen, I have nothing to urge. I'm just saying spirituality has powerful health-giving benefits, especially in the area of lifestyle change, and that's the focus in LifeStart. We want to help you change things that will help you, at least in this case, reverse diabetes. Well, with that background, let me extend the dialogue just a little bit because some of you tuning in may be saying, I don't have diabetes. Why am I watching this anyway? You need to be concerned. Everyone needs to be concerned about diabetes, and let me tell you two reasons why. Even if you don't have diabetes today, there's a very high likelihood you have a condition called pre-diabetes. That's right, pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes is a state before you develop diabetes. You have higher blood sugars than optimal, but you have not yet reached the criteria for diabetes. Let me illustrate that with fasting blood sugar. If your fasting blood sugar is below 100, most people consider that simply normal. I actually consider normal below 80. And between 81 and 99, I consider that higher normal. And once you get to 100, everyone says this is abnormal. We use the definition impaired fasting glucose. That's the terminology that's been used for years. But that didn't really stick with lay people. So we switched to the term of pre-diabetes. So if you're in the range of 100 to 125 for fasting blood sugars, that means the blood sugar when you wake up in the morning, then you have pre-diabetes. If your blood sugars are running 126 and above fasting, that meets the definition of diabetes. There's also criteria for blood sugar 2 hours after a meal. where you could also be in the pre-diabetic state. If you want more information, we have some additional details in our free resource. We have a study guide that goes along with this. You can access that at LifeStartSeminars.com. And by the way, if I went through that memory device, the LifeStart acronym too quickly, or even if you felt I went through it at just the right pace, but you want more information, you can also get a free ebook on LifeStart right there at LifeStartSeminars.com. Well, let's talk then about why you need to be concerned if you've got prediabetes. You may not even be aware of it, but prediabetes actually affects some 25 to 35% of the U.S. population looked at across the board. As we get into our 60s and beyond, you're talking about in the range of half the population with prediabetes. So we need to be concerned about this situation. The message is simply this: with the LifeStart principles, you can reverse the pre-diabetic state. In fact, what the research indicates is that 2 of those LifeStart principles, more than any other, are especially powerful in reversing the pre-diabetic state. It was looked at in what was called the Diabetes Prevention Program. What they found is simply this: take one element in LifeStart, and that's exercise. In that research, it was 30 minutes a day of moderate physical exercise. And then they combined that with the F and the L, the liquids and the foods, because that's where we get our calories. What they were focusing on is helping people lose 5 to 10% of their body weight. If that happened, if you just lost it, think about this now. If you weigh 200 pounds, let's say you're 5'2", your ideal weight maybe is as high as 120, you're a young lady, you weigh 200 pounds, and you say, wow, I got to lose 80 pounds. You don't have to lose the whole 80 pounds to get benefit. If you're 200 pounds, 5% weight loss would be how much? That's right, 10 pounds. So you drop those 10 pounds, and you do that, and you combine it with 30 minutes of exercise daily. Of course, the exercise is going to help with the weight loss. You've made some dietary changes likely as well, maybe left off the soft drinks. If I want to talk about one thing in this presentation, well, we'll talk about it right now. If you want to look at a cause of diabetes, many researchers are pointing their fingers at soft drinks, the high fructose corn syrup, the really concentrated amount of calories in those beverages. You just leave those things off, and you're going to get a tremendous aid in losing weight. And if you lose weight, it's going to help you whether you have diabetes, whether you have pre-diabetes, or whether you're in the group of people that are simply at risk for diabetes without even having pre-diabetes yet. So focus on things like water as a beverage, 0 calories in water, and stay away from those soft drinks, especially those that are sweetened with caloric sweeteners. Okay, since we're talking about it, I'll go one step further. Those artificial sweeteners, those 0-calorie soft drinks, they're not your friend either. Some of the research actually indicates that some people who drink those actually consume more calories after drinking them. And on top of that, it's just cultivating that same sweet tooth that got you into the problem that you have to begin with. If you want more information about behavior and behavioral change, we've got a lot of resources on the LifeStart website. One that I'd recommend is my DVD, Changing Bad Habits for Good. It speaks about some of these principles in general, how making clean breaks with bad habits is so powerful. But we need to just make sure we've got the whole picture here with prediabetes. In the Diabetes Prevention Program, 30 minutes of exercise a day, moderate physical activity, 5 to 10% weight loss, it led to a 58% decreased risk of developing diabetes. I mean, this is powerful. You can keep diabetes from ever coming into your household by simply following the LifeStart principles. 2 of the most important, you caught it, foods and exercise. And don't forget the liquids, because they're often a significant source of calories. Well, let's hasten on at this point and mention one other very important group that needs to be concerned. If you have a family history of diabetes, you are an individual who should be especially concerned about all that we're speaking about. And even if you don't have a family history, if you're carrying extra weight, if you're inactive, all of these things are risk factors for type 2 diabetes. And what we're trying to encourage you to do is simply catch the message, grab lifestyle, just hold on to it, however you grab it, and say, I am going to make these LifeStart changes so that I will not be affected by diabetes. Let me just make one other point here. You know, there are some people who have been genetically gifted with a very, very good pancreas. Their pancreas is so good that no matter how bad their insulin resistance, that means no matter how difficult it is for insulin to get its job done, the pancreas will just produce more and more insulin. They're going to never develop diabetes. But the problem is, if you're not following these LifeStart principles, and you're going to have more insulin resistance. Insulin's not going to work the way it should. And just because your pancreas can ramp up the insulin production, and you never get diabetes, just because you never develop diabetes, doesn't mean there aren't problems. Because insulin resistance, even if you never develop diabetes, tends to lower your good cholesterol. The HDL goes down. The bad cholesterol, the LDL, becomes more damaging. Another bad blood fat, triglycerides, rises. Are you hearing this? If you have problems with your blood fats, it may be the result of insulin resistance. Well, all of us need to be concerned. All of us need to be concerned about this very important epidemic that is affecting Americans. And whether we have diabetes, pre-diabetes, or whether we just are in danger of developing diabetes, we need to be concerned. The insulin-resistant state is a state that really sets us up for significant problems. And I want to encourage you to catch the important message from all that we're saying. We need to take action. Let's go now to a real living history example of how diabetes, insulin resistance, and related conditions can be kept at bay. We're going to look at a population that has some of the highest rates of diabetes in the world, and where researchers have learned the power of lifestyle perhaps as nowhere else. Some of you may know I host a weekly radio show called American Indian Living. I'm working with people of Native American ancestry on a regular basis. And you may not be surprised to know that one of the world's most diabetic-prone peoples are those of Native American descent. In the famous Strong Heart study that looked at Native Americans, looking at populations of Native Americans in 3 regions of the U.S., in the Dakotas, in Oklahoma, and in Arizona, they found in this study of adults that about 1/3 of the Native Americans living in North and South Dakota had diabetes. 40% of those in Oklahoma had the condition, and 2/3 of those in Arizona had diabetes. Why such staggering rates? Is it something just about Native Americans that they have to have diabetes? The evidence says no. Actually, some amazing data from the Gila River Indian Reservation, we'd say in the Phoenix area today, back around the turn of the last century, around 1900. We have good data that goes back then. Only a single case of diabetes among 4,000 individuals on that reservation. Some 40 years later, 21 individuals. Population had not changed much, but the incidence of diabetes, the prevalence of diabetes, the number of people affected had dramatically increased 20-fold, but it was still less than 1% of the population with diabetes. Today, if you go to the Gila River Indian Reservation, you look at those over 35 years of age, 50% will have diabetes. What this indicates is not a disease that is just from genetics. Yes, Native Americans in populations like the Pimas are genetically predisposed, but lifestyle is superimposed on it. How do we know? A wonderful study published back in the 90s in the journal Diabetes Care looked at people of Pima ancestry. You see, there are Pima Indians living in Arizona as well as living in Mexico. We know by actual genetic measurements, by historical observations, by language similarities, these are cousins. But what is so fascinating is these two populations live very differently. The Native Americans of Pima ancestry living in Arizona are very much less active. than their peers, their cousins in Mexico. Very physically active, living in rural Mexico, those Pimas are. Then we look at diet. Diet is fascinating. High fiber diet. Very little in the way of animal products characterizing the diet of those in Mexico. High animal product intake in the Arizona Pimas. Lots of animal fat in the diet. Over 40% by some measurements. Are you starting to get the picture? Two populations, genetically similar, lifestyle very different, exercise different, dietary factors different. What do we see when it comes to diabetes? If you look at the Mexican Pima women in that study, about 1 in 10 of relatively young women in their 30s had diabetes. It was about 4 times that much in the Arizona Pima women. If you look at the Mexican Pima men in their 40s, only about 6% had diabetes compared to nearly 9 times as many, over 50% of the Arizona men with the condition. What all this tells us is that lifestyle largely drives diabetes. Yes, as one of my endocrinology professors told me in medical school, genetics can load the gun, but lifestyle pulls the trigger. Simple practices, as embodied in that LifeStart mnemonic, can make a difference in preventing diabetes from ever occurring. Eating less animal fat. Eating things that are lower in caloric density. That means more fruits and vegetables. Again, less animal products. Fasting, that's an application of temperance, not overeating. Fasting can be used under medical direction to help reset the metabolism in people with diabetes. Well, hopefully I've given you a window on what you can do to reverse the diabetic state. It's getting serious about your diet. It's getting serious about exercise. It's controlling stress. It's resting. It's, in short, LifeStart. I have a whole 4-hour series on reversing diabetes naturally. Of course, I couldn't condense it into a single 30-minute presentation, but I've given you all the tools you really need to make dramatic changes in your lifestyle. If you do have diabetes and are taking medication, before making any dramatic changes, talk with your doctor because your insulin needs will change. Even if you're not taking insulin, you may be on oral medications that need to be readjusted. But we've got more resources for you if you need them. Like I said, we've got the study guide available for you. We've got my more extensive DVD series. We've got the program notes that go along with this. And we've got more information about other programs that can make a difference. One last thing you won't want to forget. We even have personalized help. We've got a health coaching program on the LifeStart website. You tap into it all by going to LifeStartSeminars.com. For all of us with LifeStart, I'm Dr. David DeRose, wishing you the very best success in addressing diabetes and its risk factors.